But first, before we get into the details, let's look at the big picture. If we look at the trends that our customers are facing in industry, we see that in industries like automotive, aerospace, and energy, you're experiencing major shifts and changes. In automotive and ground vehicle, lightweighting and electrification are important for meeting fuel efficiency and emissions targets. Autonomous and self-driving vehicles require new technologies, huge amounts of data, and physical validation to reduce risk. All these require massive investments. In aerospace, there are similar trends to improve fuel efficiency and reduce the weight of aircraft. And digitization means the growing role of IT with increasing use of data analytics and increasing simulation, both for design and also for smarter maintenance and operations. And in the energy industry, there's cost pressures on traditional energy sources, and there is the ongoing trend to reduce fossil fuels and the increased use of renewables such as wind and solar. And these sources also drive the need for new technologies for storing energy for later use. So this is the big picture of what we see in our customers, what you're facing in industry. And all this leads to ongoing change and the need for constant innovation. Processes must be made more efficient in order to get products to market more quickly. So that as an organization, there's a real need to work smarter. These changes must account for greater complexity. New technologies are required to meet the challenge, and more data is being collected, sorted, and analyzed in order to derive some business value. And the expectations are increasing on what all this data can deliver. And all these challenges have cost that require the right investment in the right tools and platforms to help you get there. And organizations are also requiring more tools that can be shared globally and the right products and partners to reduce the business risk of all these changes. So new ways of working are required. And as we'll see, Aqira provides a software platform to help address these challenges. But before we talk about the specific product, let me also explain the Prenscia logo that you see in the bottom right corner. Prenscia is the new software division of HBM focused on empowering engineers through assurance, integrity, and innovation. So reducing risk to derive business value is an important part of what Prenscia is about. So Prenscia comprises two brands delivering software and related services. We have ReliSoft for reliability engineering and Encode for durability prediction and high performance analysis of sensor data. And we've brought these two product ranges together in one licensing model called Prenscia Access. And this forms an important part of Aqira. Prenscia Access is a token licensing model that takes the CDS licensing we had for Encode and now extends it to ReliSoft products as well. So this means you can run any combination of Encode products like Design Life, GlyphWorks, and the recent addition for noise and vibration called VibeSys. You can run any of those products in combination and also run ReliSoft products like the widely used Weibel++ or other products that you see there, such as XFMEA, which is also increasingly used for doing improving your process of performing FMEA in your organization, whether that's a design FMEA or a process FMEA. And every Encode or ReliSoft product each draws a certain number of licensed units, and you can run those in any combination you like, up to the limit of the number of licensed units that you have. So Prenscia Access provides the licensing that's behind the product that we're talking about today. And so today we're focused on Aqira. And Aqira is a new web-based product that extends what you can do with Encode software. And it delivers an integrated engineering solution for all levels of users across both physical test and CAE simulation departments. So to summarize what Aqira provides, firstly, it provides the ability to manage and share analytical processes. Now, it's important to point out that in this case, we're not talking about replacing your existing Encode tools. We're talking about leveraging them and enabling you to get greater value from them. And we'll look at how we do that in a moment. But that's the first part of Aqira, is to enable you to manage and share these analytical processes within your organization to get better value from them. It also enables you to run all of our Encode tools directly over the web, so through a web browser, to be able to run GlyphWorks, DesignLife, VibesYs directly through a web browser without having to have a local software installation. It also introduces a new capability for creating what we call engineering apps. So the ability to put a simplified front end on what might be an otherwise complex process and then deliver that via a web portal. Because this is a server-based product, it also then provides the ability to run these analysis processes. And again, as I said in the introduction, increasingly, you're having to run an analysis on larger and larger amounts of data. And so the ability to analyze this data on a high-performance computing server or other server is becoming increasingly important, so that you take the process to the data as opposed to trying to download large amounts of data to your local machine. And importantly, we'll look at the benefits that there are from an IT perspective, and we'll also look at the benefit of a cost-effective deployment and licensing model around the Prenscia Access license units I've just described, and how that is applied and costed globally. And additionally, the ability to then control and track that license token usage. If you have a big set of license units you want to use globally across an organization, the way that you can control who has access to how many units and what they're used for, and understanding usage is a very important function. So if we look at how the benefits of Aqira are delivered, we can really summarize it in three ways. Firstly, in the area of sharing and standardization. So this is a real benefit for engineers to be able to share their analysis processes, standardize those processes, lock them down, and make sure the right people have access to the right process. We also have what I like to call apps and democratization. So taking what could otherwise be a complex process and enable more users to be able to run that process and get the right answers. And thirdly, deployment and globalization. So increasingly, IT has an increasing role in what engineers do, how engineers function, what tools they use. And so providing a means by which we can streamline that process of deployment and also make it cost-effective to use it globally. So let's look at each one of those in turn as we summarize what Aqira does. So for sharing and standardization, let's look at some of the challenges currently you may have in terms of performing engineering analysis, engineering simulations in your department. Well, from what we see in terms of talking to customers, engineers develop many different analysis processes. Engineers are always coming up with new ways of doing things, but managing of that process can be another matter. That can be challenging. And oftentimes people have separate files that are stored on their local computer. They aren't easily accessible to other users or even necessarily well organized. And so multiple copies of your same process can be used with different versions, slightly different versions being used in different departments or in different groups. Not always easy to know even who's using it. If you find a problem with the process, to go back and say, hey, you know what, this calculation needs adjusting. It can be difficult to then pull those back in. And so the result of that is that different departments, different groups often have similar but different analysis methods for doing what should be the same task, with little or no documentation. And all of this results in an uncertain quality of analysis. Yes, you're doing analysis, but just how good is it? Just how high a quality is the analysis that you're doing as an organization? So in this area, Aqira provides a solution for engineers where you're using a web portal as a central location where analysis can be stored and shared. And because we understand what's in an analysis process, so for example, in Encode software, we have what are called flow files that define a whole analysis process in GlyphWorks or Design Life, let's say. Because we understand what's in those analysis processes, we can extract the information from those flow files and make it accessible and the information accessible about those flows. And we're providing this in Aqira through an on-premises installation of a web-based solution. So it's a web-based portal for sharing this information. We then provide access, or you can then control who can access what analysis processes. You can make it accessible to individuals or to complete groups that you define, groups of users. There's obviously version control that you can put on that. You can define the contents, the details, defining the contents or describing the contents of that analysis. And then you can also find those processes by using search on metadata and on tags, so enabling you to find the process that's relevant for you. And the process then also enables you to keep with your process the right documentation so that more people can use that analysis process. So to summarize, the benefits that you get from that, you get improved quality of analysis, you reduce the wasted effort in either reinventing methods or trying to find the right analysis method to use, and also avoids using incorrect or out-of-date processes. So sharing and standardization is obviously important for improving the quality of your analysis in your organization. So as an example here, with Aqira, we have the concept of what called flow details. So with an analysis process flow, upload it into Aqira, and then you can manage those processes in a central location and store additional information and documentation on each one. Not only that, but when that analysis process is stored, that would be a great, that has value in and of itself. But you can also take that analysis process and you don't have to download it to your local desktop. You can actually open it directly through Aqira, open the analysis process in your browser and actually interact with that process. You can select data that's accessible to the server. You can select it, you can drag it on, you can interact with it, just like you're working on your desktop, but you're actually running the Encode software directly through a web browser. So that has the benefit of reducing the deployment of individual software on local machines, and also provides the ability, or the potential at least, to be able to use the server, the power of your server computing for that analysis. So as an example, let's say there's an engineer in Stuttgart who's developed a durability process, and so with Aqira, what he would be able to do is upload that process into Aqira, and then through the web, other engineers within the same organization can then access that standardized process. They can see the documentation, they can see what it contains, they can either run it directly over the web, or if they prefer, they can download it directly to their local machine and run it using their local software. So let's now turn our attention to the second area of benefit, in the area of apps and democratization. And really, these are some of the challenges around for engineering managers to get greater value from the resources that are at their disposal. So oftentimes, engineers come up with the analysis processes. For example, you create a great design life process for predicting the fatigue of, let's say, a welded joint. But analysis processes can often only be run by the experts. It requires a lot of expertise to know what the right settings are, what the right options are that to be used, what goes where in the interface, and so that can be a limitation. Because analysis processes can often have options that are irrelevant for the specific application, and they shouldn't be changed. So, you know, there are lots of things, there are options on the screen that could be confusing to someone who's not familiar with the software or the process. That also means that the corporate knowledge is limited to only a few individuals. There's only a few experts that understand within an organization how to do a particular analysis, how to do a particular cleaning of measured data to remove anomalies and spikes from the data. And spreading analysis is difficult due to the expertise, software installations, and local computing resources required. In other words, you'd need to have the software installed, the engineer needs to be able to access it, and he needs to know how to run it. So this limits the number of people who can actually get value from the software, and all this results in risk and wasted opportunity. So the solution using Aqira is the ability to provide web-based apps. So the ability for the user to create their own processes, or what you might call a vertical application around the customer process that defines what are the right inputs, what are the settings required, and provides a simplified front end, which is then easier to use for less expert users. And it's very important that we create a means for users to create these applications without it requiring IT involvement or software development, someone having to learn how to write use a scripting language or computer language to create these apps. We've made it such that if you can create an analysis process in GlyphWorks, if you can drag and drop glyphs to create a process, that's the same level of expertise you'd require in order to create an app. You have a drag and drop interface to create the individual steps and the components within the app to make it easy to use, to drag and drop and create these simplified front ends for use. Once you've created an app, it's now going to then perform its analysis on the server. So that now takes the load off running it on your local PC. You're able then to analyze large amounts of data, all with a simplified front end, but making use of the server resources within your organization. And just like we were describing for sharing of the flow processes or the individual analysis processes, these complete apps, which may include multiple analysis processes or multiple options, can then be shared with individuals or groups of users as you prefer. So the value of all this is you're reducing the risk of the reliance on a few individuals. You're enabling less expert users to be able to perform more analysis. But of course, experts are still very much needed. Experts are very much needed in order to create the processes. But then also you're freeing up your experts in order to be able to do even more valuable engineering tasks, coming up with new methods, looking at innovation, looking at ways that you can move what you do as an organization forward. So you're freeing them up from having to perform more routine tasks and enabling them to spend more time on more innovative tasks. So because, just to illustrate, if you're running a GlyphWorks process on your desktop, the interface, the more complex your process becomes, the more difficult an analysis, the usage of that software is going to be, just through the level of the complexity of what you're trying to run. So instead, with Aqira, you'll be able to put you can put a simplified front end on your process, go through a few screens, for example, selecting the data you want to use, make a few settings, choose some property settings for analysis, and then just simplify the interpretation of those results or the display of those results to a few simple results screens. So you're taking what can be a complex process and instead you're wrapping it through the web interface with a simplified front end that more engineers can then use, and therefore you're expanding the capability of your organization to actually do more useful engineering work using software. The third area is in the area of deployment and globalization. So this is really a challenge for IT managers. And as I mentioned, this is the intersection of IT and computing resources, computing technology is becoming more and more important for what we have to do as engineers every day to deliver meaningful results. So, but some of the challenges that IT managers face are there's more installations and software to manage. There's increasing drive in order to be able to standardize processes, use the same processes globally. That means being able to use this software globally, have global platforms that can run software to standardize processes, but that can have a downside. That can have a downside of global licensing costs, and making sure that those global licensing costs are justified to the organization. It can also be difficult to manage license tokens globally. So using a license token system, such as the Prenscia access approach that I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, that has great benefit in terms of flexibility. You can mix and match which products you use. It can also, though, be a concern for IT managers to make sure that those license units are being used in a way that is controlled, so that not all the units are all being used by one department, so that they can that can be a concern that the use of the license tokens is not controlled. It can also be complex to support web-based software. So I've described Aqira as being a server-based, web-based software. Well, that has its own infrastructure challenges, and so that can be a concern when providing a larger enterprise platform. So all of those challenges all have the potential to result in higher costs and also greater complexity. So what's the solution with Aqira? Well, Aqira provides, as we saw, what we call remote Encode. So Encode products fully interactive over the web. So this simplifies the installation requirements from the point of view of not having to have local installations on your local desktop. Now, if you want to carry on doing that, absolutely no problem. In fact, you will still tend to use the local desktop tools for authoring those processes and expert analysis, but it does give you the option, if you want to, of running Encode software directly through a web interface. Aqira also has this unique licensing and pricing model for Prenscia access license tokens, where we use LAN or local area network pricing, but allow you to use those licenses globally. And we enable you to do that because it's Prenscia access, global usage of both Encode and ReliaSoft products, all at local LAN pricing. And the way we do that is that we then use what we call time zone scaling on the unit draw for cost-effective usage. And that's for both through the web and also through the desktop. So if you're running the software just like you do today on your desktop, we will use time zone scaling, which I'll explain in a minute how that works. But the price of the individual license units is at a LAN price, so with no global multiplier on the price. And Aqira provides licensing groups to manage how many license tokens are available for each group of users. So again, to address the concern that we've got this pile of license tokens, we want to control who can access how many of them. And Aqira has built-in functionality to make that very easy to set up in order for you to set minimums and maximums on the usage of license units. if that's what you'd like to do. It's optional. It's up to you how you use those license groups, but it can be a very powerful means by which you can, as an IT manager, control who is using the licenses and how much. So the value to IT managers is reduced administration effort by enabling web access and avoiding many local installations, cost-effective global licensing, and improved management of license tokens. So let's look at an example of the license scaling. So let's take an example of a supplier with offices in Detroit, Sao Paulo, Stuttgart, Pune, Shanghai. 5 separate licenses, if they had, each one had separate license servers, would mean greater administration. You've got to manage each of those licenses. You've got to organize those separately. It can also be a question, well, what's the correct capacity for each location? Do we have enough tokens over in India? Do we need more in Brazil? And traditionally, the global licensing for a single pool of units would require a traditional follow-the-sun pricing model, and with Encode software, it's a 1.75 multiplier on the cost of a license in order to be able to then have the ability to float that license globally to any location. Well, instead, with Aqira, the Prenscia access license draw is instead adjusted by time zone. So the token pricing is still at 1.0, it's LAN pricing, but now the number of units is actually scaled. So depending on how many hours in terms of the time zone you are, we look at the time zone of the user, and depending on where the user is, we then multiply the number of units drawn for running that module of the software. So in this case, the customer is always ahead. You're always ahead because instead of multiplying up on 1.75, in other words, for all the usage, depending on where your users are relative to your time zone server, the majority of your users may be using your licenses at a 1.0 LAN unit draw, just like it was a regular LAN license. But you've still got the flexibility now of using those license tokens globally. So the difference here, in summary, is that the license tokens are not scaled in terms of price. Rather, they're scaled in terms of the number of units drawn, and that's dependent on how many time zones away you are from the actual license server. So we see this as being a great benefit. In fact, we have a lot of customers already who are very keen to use and start using Aqira because they see the benefit of just this alone. It enables you then to get a very cost-effective way of floating and controlling your usage globally. And we'll actually look at a summarize of a demo for you later on. We'll talk about how we control the number of units, because that's another important part of that what you can do with Aqira around license units. So just to summarize again what Aqira provides, it enables you to manage and share analytical processes, it enables you to run Encode over the web. So these provide direct benefits for engineers and ease of use. It also provides the ability to create and to use engineering apps. So the ability to put a simplified front end upon an analysis process such that more engineers are able to run a more sophisticated analysis. Because Aqira is server-based, it then provides the ability to perform scalable server-based analysis. So rather than having to download all your data and perform that locally, you can then upload effectively your process to where all your data is and analyze the data remotely. It provides the benefit of cost-effective deployment and licensing, and also the ability to control and track license token usage. And so you can choose what demos you'd like to see. Rather than going through the demos now one by one, you can choose what demos you'd like to see of Aqira by going online. You can go to encode.com/Aqira, and there we have several videos. There's several videos on that website, and there are 3 different demos that you can choose from. So depending on what I just described there, the sounding of interest to you, whether it was managing flows or running them over the web, or creating engineering apps and putting a simplified front end, or maybe from an IT perspective, the use of global units and how you manage those, we've got 3 different demos that you could go and review online. So just to help you choose, or you may want to look at all of them, but let me just give you some background to describe what those demos are, so you can go and watch them at your own leisure. So in the first demo, in the area of sharing and standardization, here's an example whereby there is an engineer who's created an analysis process, and an engineer in the Detroit office is responsible for defining similar durability validation tests. So he has already a time history of the dominant load on a component, but he needs to define an equivalent constant amplitude test. So in this demo, we'll look and see how he can use Aqira to find the right process and run the analysis. And in this example then, you'll learn about Aqira's flow list page, which is how we store the flow, so you can find the flows that's of interest, how to find and then how flows are then shared with other users. And also you'll see an example of interactively being able to run Encode software, choosing data, running a flow, interacting with the displays, all via the web using remote Encode. So this illustrates how Aqira enables you to improve collaboration and the quality of analysis. So that's the first demo that's on the encode.com/Aqira page. The second demo is in the area of apps and democratization, because as we just discussed, analysis process flows can get complicated. So how do we enable less expert users to do more analysis? So take this another example where you're responsible for defining, in this case, a vibration durability test. You have some measured data of the component in operation under different conditions. And your company's standard procedure is to find the maximum envelope of the PSD in 3 directions, X, Y, Z, to represent the worst case condition at each frequency. So in this example, you need to run an app in Aqira to help calculate those 3 PSDs and generate what is that worst case profile that you should then run on your shaker test. So what could be a complex process to do is now simplified using a simple app. So in this example, you'll learn about Aqira, the app list page, finding and running apps, and also how to create an app. And so there's a couple of examples of different apps that are being run in that demo, all with the purpose of showing how Aqira helps you enable less expert users to do more analysis. And the third example is in the area of deployment and globalization. So license tokens can be in demand by multiple groups. How do we enable better management of these licenses? So in this case, we have the example of Mike, who's the administrator for the Prenscia access licensing at your company. The 20,000 license tokens are used by different groups. You've got CAE groups, you've got test validation groups, powertrain engineering, and reliability groups. And he wants to ensure that the CAE group in Detroit cannot use more than 50% of the tokens. And he also wants to ensure that the powertrain group always has access to 5,000 units. In other words, he wants to reserve 5,000 license units just for the use of the powertrain group. And these are exactly the kind of things that you can do using Aqira to manage your license tokens. So in this example then you'll learn about dashboards and the dashboard capability in Aqira to present information, and the license management apps specifically that are available on the dashboard for licenses. You have concepts of users and groups, how users are defined, how they are put into different groups, and also how those groups can be used for controlling the use of licenses, the ability to be able to set license token limits, either a minimum number of units, in other words, a reservation of units for a group, or a maximum number of tokens. In other words, you want to make sure that, like in this case, the CAE group are not allowed to use more than 50% of your available license units. So again, putting the power back in the hands of the IT administrator to more easily control how license units are used. And all that really with the benefit of enabling greater efficiency in license units. So again, go to encode.com/Aqira and you can watch the third demo there, which is around licenses and license management and how Aqira helps provide that. So that brings us to the end of the summary I wanted to go through today. Hopefully that gave you some idea of some of the benefits Aqira may bring to you and your organization, whether it's in the area of managing your analysis processes, whether it's in the area of apps for making it easier for more people to run those analysis processes, or in the area of licensing, making it cost-effective to use the analysis processes globally and control who has access.